the first day of unleavened bread. And what's significant about it is the day when Israel started on their journey away from slavery in Egypt towards the promised land. For New Testament Christians, it has its own special meaning because it represents when we were first called as we began our journey in the wilderness. Now, during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Israel was still in Egypt at that time as they began their journey. By the last day of unleavened bread, they passed through the Red Sea, which represents baptism, and began their 40 years in the wilderness. Now, an interesting point. Most of us have been converted and gone more than 40 years in the wilderness. We've exceeded that amount for most of us, not all of us. And if you were just starting out, this is giving you something to look forward to. So let's reflect during this holy day and this week about our journey through the wilderness. What has it been like for each of us? What we found is that this wilderness journey is not easy, but God has always been with us throughout this journey. So in this sermonette, let's take a look at what God did for Israel and apply it to our journey through the wilderness. The first point, God selected a special route for Israel. I'm going to read some from Exodus. You don't have to turn there. Exodus 13:17 says, "Then it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God did not lead them by the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest perhaps the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea." The significance here for each of us is that God is not necessarily going to take the shortest route. He's going to take each of us individually on the route that we need to be on. And even if you're married, the routes will be slightly different. Obviously, if you're married, there'll be overlap, but the routes will be different. And it will be particularly for you, for each one of us. But let's turn to 1 Corinthians 10:13 and take a look about God's interaction on our special route. So 1 Corinthians 10:13. "God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape that you may be able to bear it." So the significance here is that as Israel had a difficult route while they were still in Egypt, we will also face difficulties. You will notice that God did not say to Israel, okay, you're going to go 2 days and then you're going to spend 3 days at Club Med. Take it easy. There was none of that. But the point is that God was always with them. He will always be with us, and he will be involved in developing our character, because that's what we take through to the kingdom of God. Now, sometimes we wonder, he says, well, it can't tempt us beyond what we can stand. Now, sometimes I wonder how come God had such a high opinion of me, because I had a much lower opinion. But we will each be tested to our ability and grow through it. And that's actually the point. Now, Israel didn't do too well on their less tempted route. But God leads us each on our own individual path through the wilderness. Some people, that path involves losing their job for keeping the Sabbath or the holy days. You know, it isn't easy. But most of the people where this happened, they ended up with better jobs or perhaps an entirely new career. So I want you to think about your journey. How many twists and turns have you taken in your journey to the promised land? And each time, reflect on what God has done for you. Second point on the journey, on those first 6 days of unleavened bread, God provided a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire so that Israel would not get lost. Reading from Exodus 14, verse 21. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so as to go by day and night. Well, the first point is the journey is a 24/7 journey. God's going to be there 24/7 every day of the year, and that's important. So God is always with us so that we can always stay on course. But note, it does not stop someone from leaving and going sideways on their own path. And we know people who have done that. They have stopped following the pillar of fire or the pillar of cloud and gone their own way and got lost. Well, there are a lot of ways that people can get lost. There are doctrinal issues are one problem. Some people just lose their enthusiasm and drop out. They get tired. Others get distracted by things in the world. But we know that God will always provide that protection and that leadership as represented by the pillar of the cloud and fire. Now, for us, the fire and the cloud are present in our Bible study, in our prayer, in services, and in counseling. Because he will speak to us in prayer. He will speak to us and show us special verses in our Bible study to show us which way to go. And we have to be careful to follow, because as some of Israel did, they went off to the side, so can we. Third point, Pharaoh, as represented by Satan, will chase us. I'm reading from Exodus 14, verse 10. And when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. So they were very afraid. And the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. Well, here the children of Israel did the right thing. They cried out to the Lord. But the point is that along our journey, Satan and his demons will always be there, tempting us, trying to distract us, trying to confuse us, and get us off the path. However, God will protect us, which is why he sent the cloud and the fire. If we think that our troubles are especially bad, I want you to think of Job and read the book of Job. Because none of us equal what Satan did to Job. Not only did Job lose all of his wealth and power, all 10 of his children were killed in one day. Losing one child is traumatic. Losing all 10 in one day. And we look at his poor wife who was blaming him, and Job was actually innocent, but I give her a lot of slack. I can't imagine a woman's grief in losing all of her children in one day. Losing all of your children, period, let alone in one day. Plus, Job lost his friends. So our trial through the wilderness has been nowhere near as severe as Job. And when we start to feel like it is, we should read the book of Job and realize what this man went through. In our own lives, when things seem to be going well, usually something will happen. And now we have an obstacle, a trial, something we have to face. It happened to Israel. They were really happy when they were leaving slavery. Hey, this is great. We're not slaves anymore. And then they find that Pharaoh and his army is chasing them. Then it's not so great. And we can expect similar things happening to us. Times when things will be going well, could turn south. Something can happen. We could be tempted. We could be put in a bad situation. We can get very upset over something that happened. But as long as we don't lose faith in God, God will protect us as he protected Israel. And the fourth point, actually you're supposed to give 3 in a sermonette. I'm giving a 4th. There's no extra charge, so don't worry. God opens a way when it appears impossible. God parted the Red Sea. I've often wondered how God did that. And I was wondering, and this is my own speculation, because in order to have a wind strong enough to part the Red Sea, you're looking at winds maybe 400 miles an hour. No one's walking into that. And that blows everything away. So I'm wondering if the force of the wind didn't cause some of the water to evaporate, and there were ice walls, and they walked between those ice walls. And when Pharaoh came through, the ice was starting to melt and broke and crushed them. But that's my speculation. It's a possibility. I don't know if that's the case, but I just was curious in thinking about that. Well, we've each had our own very difficult circumstances, and perhaps we were caught in crossfires. I was caught in a crossfire in my previous employ as a college prof in Virginia, and God opened up a new way, which brought me to the Chicago area. So when a situation feels impossible and very, very unfair, God can open up a way as long as we stay close to him. No, the wilderness travel of Israel and our particular journeys is not easy. The route is unknown, and there are obstacles that we will each have to uniquely face. The difficulties that I faced, and those my children faced, and my grandkids are all very different. My obstacles are different than your obstacles. Your obstacles are unique, particular for you to develop your character. Keeping God's law in an amoral and evil society is not easy. This feast of unleavened bread lets us think about our individual journey through the wilderness. And we can look back on how God has brought us through all of our previous trials, as well as our previous troubles. Through Bible study, we can read about the Exodus, see the trials that Israel went through, and then see how they apply to us. And this would make a good Bible study during the days of unleavened bread, because that's what it represents. And let us each be thankful for God's guidance and deliverance as we are on our journey to approach the promised land. And all of it is worth it as we grow and develop as Christians, grow and develop in character, especially godly character, throughout our trials and throughout these holy days.